connecting, and we are recording. All right. Thank you, Dr. Sparto.
All right. Great. Thank you, Leslie, for the very nice introduction to this. And I'd also like to welcome everyone to the Journal Club tonight. This experience is a new one in terms of doing it in this format. So hopefully we can all share ideas and learn something. Before everyone got on, we had a little group discussion of sort of how we'd like to handle the questions. And basically what we came up with is after I present each section of the article, meaning the introduction, methods, results, etc., we'll take a little break and then visit some of the questions that have been asked during that time. And then, you know, we won't be able to get to all the questions probably, but, you know, we should be able to get to a good number of them. And rather than just have me go straight through. The other thing that we decided to do is I'm going to share my screen so I can highlight certain parts of the article, whether they're figures, tables, etc., so that it'll be easy to discuss those areas. Hopefully everyone has the article with them or in front of them on a computer or hard copy. And as you saw at the beginning in the chat box, there are links to both the article and the case study. So with that, I don't really need to say anything about myself except for really postural control in mobility in older adults is one of my passions, both in terms of research and also in clinical practice. So I'm really happy to be able to share the results for this. So I'm going to actually share my screen now with the article. And hopefully this is big enough on your screen. If it looks a little bit small, I sort of have it maximized as much as I can. You may want to go up in the corner where it says to do full screen, and you may be able to see a bigger portion of it, or you may be able to see it zoomed a little bit. So before I begin presenting the article, I'd like to acknowledge all of the co-authors who worked really hard on this research. And the first person to acknowledge is the primary author on the study, Badr Al-Qahtani, who was our PhD student at Pitt, who performed the work in this study. After myself is Professor Susan Whitney, who I'm sure you all know, who was very instrumental in the study design and in guiding the research in this area. Susan Greenspan is one of our collaborators at the University of Pittsburgh. She is an MD, a geriatrician, and her main area is examining, looking at older adults who live in assisted living facilities. And her primary area is in bone health, and she was a very important contributor in this. Sebastian Pereira is our statistician who appears on many of our studies at Pitt, and of course we would be nowhere without our biostatisticians. And then the final two authors, Jesse Van Swearingen and Jen Brock, who have been very active in the Academy of Geriatric Physical Therapy, of course. They're really the two people who are the central developers of the intervention in this study. This work definitely generated from their minds in this. So it's really important to acknowledge them. All right. So again, the title is Effective Community-Based Group Exercise Interventions on Standing Balance and Strength in Independent Living Older Adults. And this work was funded, I should also mention, by PCORI, Patient-Centered Outcomes Institute. And they funded this study to look at the group exercise interventions, one of the important parts of the PCORI Institute is to really involve patients in their medical decision-making. So a large part of the study was to get stakeholder input from the people who actually were living independently and participating in these programs in the community, the senior communities where this took place. So that sort of gives an overall, an overview of sort of where this came from. So I'm going to skip over the abstract, which has all of the main details, but starting off with the introduction, you don't need to reiterate the statistics for everyone, which everyone knows about the morbidity and mortality of falls that occur in older adults. So if we move forward more towards what was the reason for developing this particular intervention, basically comes from the literature, which shows that interventions that really aim to address some of the impairments, such as reduced strength or reduced range of motion, etc., targeting those specific things really have not made really much of a difference in terms of improving mobility, especially things like gait speed. So the group at Pitt, led by Drs. Brock and Van Swearingen, have been studying for a while interventions really targeted at restoring, if you will, the skill of walking. And it's felt that, you know, due to some of the declines across many organ systems in older adults, that, you know, it's a common experience that people will say that, you know, they don't walk as quickly as they used to, or they don't walk the same as they used to. So basically, they, for a long time, have been taking the perspective of motor control to restore walking. And early on, their studies looked at things like gait efficiency, the energy cost of walking. And then later, in particular with this study, they looked at restoring the actual mobility. So this study really came from a subset of participants who were enrolled in this larger On the Move study. And the main parent study, the On the Move study, was looking at the effect of the intervention, and we're going to talk more about the intervention in a little bit, but the primary outcomes were on disability, gait speed, and endurance. And what this subsample of the study, what we wanted to look at was, with this intervention, did it also address some of the impairments that the older adults would have in terms of balance impairments and then strength impairments? So, you know, a lot of the interventions prior to this had taken the perspective, well, let's build up the strength and the balance and see if that has an effect on mobility. We sort of took the converse view of it and said, well, here's this intervention to look at restoring mobility. Does it have an effect on strength and balance outcomes, in addition to the primary outcomes that were in the main study? So that's really the purpose of the article, was to, and you can see it highlighted here right before the methods, was to determine the effect of the on-the-move exercise program on standing balance performance and lower extremity muscle strength in community dwelling older adults, and compare the results with a standard exercise group and a control group. So I'm going to take a pause there and see if anyone has any questions about sort of the gap in the literature that we wanted to address, or anything else about sort of the motivation for the study. All right, so I don't see anything so far, so I'll just go ahead and move on into the methods and describe how we did this. So first off, looking at the study design, we really need to talk about the study design for the parent study, because this subset came from that. So for the parent study, they looked at a group exercise program because they wanted to have a delivery and scale this up eventually so that it could be administered on a much larger scale. And really the only way to do that is through group exercise programs. And what they did was they partnered with the local healthcare system, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center healthcare system, which actually manages several different senior community living. So basically there were 32 different senior communities involved. And these included 7 independent, or the total sample was more, but in this particular study, there were 18 different sites, 7 independent living facilities, 3 senior community centers, and 8 senior apartment buildings or high rises. All right, so this set of 18 sites was pulled from the 32 sites in the whole study. Those 32 sites were randomized into 2 separate arms of the study. And the 2 separate arms were the on-the-move group exercise intervention, and then the second arm was the usual care or standard group exercise intervention, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. So the reason why the centers were randomized rather than each individual participant being randomized was because, again, these were group exercise programs, and within a facility, it was felt that there would be too much contamination across participants if within a facility you had one group who was getting the on-the-move program and another group was getting the standard exercise program. And when you see what is involved in those groups or those different exercise programs, you'll see why this is. You can see here in the right-hand column that there was a total convenience sample of 131 people. And this is out of a total group of close to 300 people in the full study. The other thing to mention in terms of the study design, and something that's really important in this particular part of the study, is that within each center, depending on the group that they were in, whether it was the on-the-move group or the standard exercise group, there was actually a subset for each of those where some participants immediately began the exercise program, and another group was put on a wait list whereby they had a 12-week period where they continued with their normal activity. And then at the end of the 12 weeks, then they would enter the exercise program. So we had a really nice, in effect, control group to see what would happen with people who did not immediately begin to participate in the exercise program. And you'll see when we get to the results how important it was to have that. Inclusion, exclusion criteria are always really important. So this was a group of participants who are 65 years of age or older. They had to be a resident of one of the independent living facilities, senior community centers, et cetera. And also importantly, they needed to have a gait speed of greater than 0.6 meters per second. So, you know, that's considered sort of a threshold from where they would expect that change could occur. In terms of exclusion criteria, if they were non-English speaking and would not be able to provide consent. Also, if they had impaired cognition, if they had a plan on leaving the area or had a degenerative neuromuscular condition. So with that, a total of 3 groups were formed. And that's highlighted here in this second column. The on the move group that received the immediate exercise, and that's designated by the IM, and that was an N of 28. The standard exercise group that received exercise immediately, and that's N of 33. And then the waitlist group, in both cases, who were continuing on with their normal activities with an N of 46. If we look at the overall designation here in this figure, you can see, again, just the summary of the 18 facilities. Out of that, it just turned out, because this was a subsample, that the number involved in the on the move group was N of 54 compared to an N of 77 for the standard exercise group. And then you can see after baseline testing how the participants were randomized into immediate exercise and then the waitlist control group. In both cases, the intervention lasted 12 weeks, and we'll talk about that more. So you can see here, 12-week exercise, 12-week wait, and the same in the standard group. And then the final N, when we get to the results, is 28 in the on the move group immediate, 33 in the standard group immediate, and then a total of 46 in the waitlist control group. All right, so now we can talk about, well, what was the actual intervention? And if we see here in the left-hand column, both the standard and the on the move were conducted twice a week for a period of 12 weeks, and each session lasted for 50 minutes. And these were led by trained instructors who had a training manual. And while each participant did these exercises, they were able to be progressed on an individual basis based on different levels of activity that were indicated in the treatment manual. Both groups, in order to have an equal amount of time for 50 minutes, the things that were common to both protocols are shown here, which both protocols included lower extremity strengthening exercises, a warm-up, and a cool down. Where the two programs differed is first talking about the on the move exercise program, and you can see the amount of time devoted to each segment of the intervention. Warm-up exercises were 5 minutes. The stepping and walking exercises were 20 to 30 minutes, followed by strengthening exercises for 10 minutes and cool down. So the key ingredient here for this were the stepping and walking exercises. And this was really based on the prior work that had been done by Doctors Brock and Van Swearingen, where they had exercises work on the timing and coordination of stepping by trying this coordinating AV ductors and AD ductors to facilitate loading and unloading.
We seem to have lost our main speaker.
Sorry, I'm back now.
Oh, whew, scared me there.
Yeah, Zoom dropped out on me, so that's the first time I've had my Zoom drop out. So,
All right, welcome back.
Okay, how much was lost? What was the last thing that I said?
You were talking about what was the same in the two treatments and specifically what was different about the on the move.
Okay, thank you. The part that was different about on the move was the timing and coordination exercises. Drs. Brock and Van Swearingen has done a lot of pilot work for trying to improve the motor control aspects of walking and gait. And this is done by doing different weight shifting exercises, different stepping patterns, and different walking patterns. So it's really sort of an adaptable gait. So to give you an example of some of the exercises, right now I'm showing the treatment manual. And if you go to the article, that's the main article that's in JAMA Internal Medicine. And I'll just show that briefly here. If you go to that, one of the supplemental files is the intervention manual. And so if you want to implement a program similar to this, I highly recommend that you go to this. But just to give you an example of the walking and stepping patterns that are done, I'll just scroll down and let me increase the size here. So this is still in the warm-up part. Walking patterns, walking in ovals, starting small, then concentric, walking in different directions, spirals, serpentine. So it's really meant to do what people do out in the real world, which is change directions, all right, and facilitating that. I'll let you look at that at your leisure. And then finally, the stepping patterns, which start off with just stepping forward and then following with the left foot and then stepping back. And then basically doing things like stepping backward and then forward, and then also doing diagonal steps where you step back, for instance, with your right foot, and then you step forward with your right foot and then come across midline. So it's really getting the weight shifting involved in getting the interactions and the coordination between the hip abductors and adductors, and then hip extensors and flexors. So I could talk a lot longer about this, but we really don't have the time. The standard exercise program was basically primarily based on seated exercise programs that are commonly done in senior communities. Example would be Sit and Be Fit. So it's really, you know, an effect control group for this because they're not really doing any walking as part of this program. So the difference with this is there are cardiovascular exercises done for 20 minutes. And then again, strengthening exercises. These strengthening exercises, we had a little mistake in the article where it said some of those were in standing positions. Those were basically done in seated positions. The cardiovascular exercises were also done in a seated position as well. In effect, that was the standard exercise group. The primary outcomes that we measured in this study were balance. And what we did for balance were the 4 conditions of the modified clinical test of sensory interaction and balance. So standing on a level or a film surface with both eyes open and eyes closed. And in addition, we added 2 other tests, which is standing balance in the semi-tandem stance and then also in the full tandem stance. And while while the participants stood in each of those conditions for 30 seconds, they had an accelerometer attached around their waist to measure their body sway in the anterior, posterior, and medial lateral directions. So those were the main measures for the balance test. For the lower extremity strength test, we had a uniaxial load cell, so you know, a force transducer. It wasn't the typical hand dynamometer, but we had a uniaxial load cell that we attached to straps that were inextensible, and we had the participants do 3 different maximal voluntary contractions for 3 lower extremity movements, and that is in hip abduction, knee extension, and ankle plantar flexion. I'm not going to worry about the stats because I'd like to move on to the results because I know I'm I think talking a lot longer than I expected, and I want to leave time for the case study. So let's just go to the results. The first one is looking at the baseline characteristics of participants. So it's always important to make sure that the groups that you start off with are pretty equivalent in their characteristics. And you can see in the top row of the table that across the 3 groups, the on the move, immediate, standard immediate, and the wait list, the mean age was across the whole sample about 80 years of age, and you can see the on the move was slightly younger, but not statistically different. The only things that they differed across the groups were in education, where the on the move group had less people who were college educated. And then also the on the move group had a larger percentage of the sample who had type 2 diabetes. In terms of some main characteristics that we were really interested in, you can see that the groups did not differ in the original or the initial gait speed, which were around 0.9 to 0.96 meters per second, or times in the chair rise test, or the short physical performance battery. So we were happy to see that the groups were pretty equal. The next thing to talk about is the results of the balance test. And if we first look in this first column here, in the on the move group, what we're looking here is at the change in effect body sway measures from the baseline test to the post test at week 12. And all of these are indicating the minus signs are indicating a reduction in body sway. And this is typically considered to be an improvement in balance. So in effect, they have more control over their body during all of these conditions during the clinical test of sensory integration and balance and then also in semi-tandem and tandem stance. Now, if we look at the standard group, we can see, again, reductions in balance across many of the conditions, but those were non-significantly different compared to baseline. So there was only one where there was a significant reduction compared to baseline, and that was in the AP direction in the foam eyes closed condition. And then finally, in the waitlist group, we had, you can see here a couple more where they're positive. They're very small, so in effect we would say very little change. There was a significant change in anterior posterior sway during level eyes open condition. I really wouldn't give that one too much clinical significance. And then there was a reduction in sway in the condition of in the medial lateral direction for foams eyes closed. Now, when we compare across groups, the thing that came across was the on the move group. There was no difference between the on the move group and the standard exercise group. There was difference in 3 of the conditions in the on the move group compared to the waitlist group. So improvement in body sway in the on the move group compared to the waitlist group. And then for 2 of the measures, the standard group performed better than the waitlist group. So overall, you know, it looks like for standing balance, at least, that the on the move group was the best intervention as far as improving standing balance. So I think that would be one take-home point. The next part of the results to consider is the change in strength. And for this, we'll look at the these graphs here. And first, if we look at hip abduction, we can see the on the move group had a 6.8% increase in strength. The standard group had an 8.1% increase in strength. But look at what happened to the waitlist group. They actually had a 13% reduction in strength across those 12 weeks when they were just continuing their typical activities. For knee extension strength, again, improvements in on the move and the standard, even more so in the standard group. And again, the waitlist group showed a reduction in knee extension strength across those 12 weeks. And then ankle plantar flexion strength, there was very little change in the on the move and standard exercise groups, but again, a 13% decrease. So I think the second key take-home point is for the participants who are just continuing on with their daily lives, they're having reductions in strength, and that these group exercise programs can counteract that by either maintaining strength or even increasing it. And, you know, so part of the intervention in these exercise programs was strengthening exercises. So, you know, I think that goes along with the strengthening exercises that were being performed. We can't necessarily attribute that to the walking patterns. But, you know, to me, it really drove home that we need to get our older adults up and doing strengthening exercises to improve their strength. And then these timing and coordination gait exercises to improve their gait, which was in the main study. And then it also has an influence on their standing balance as well. So I think I'm going to stop there to answer maybe just a couple questions. And then I really want to have time for Dr. Scrantz to present her work as well.
Thank you, Dr. Sparto. I'll just read out a couple of the questions that are on the side. As far as your methods for the walking exercises, were there timing or accuracy demands for the walking exercises? Was that part of how they were progressed?
I think the walking timing. So during the exercise intervention, I don't think the timing was explicitly measured in terms of, looking at least while they were performing the exercises, they actually had gait mats set up where they could measure that, but the exercise progression was not based on that per se.
Okay. Two questions very similar related to outcome measures. I'll read both of them, but they are very close together. Why were static standing balance tests used for testing when neither training group practiced these skills? And can you discuss the rationale for the choice of outcome measures to quantify changes in balance?
Right. So one thing that we wanted to do, and one thing that our group had been doing before, was seeing if we could do instrumented measures of balance out in the community. We had a previous research project where we did this in assisted living facilities. And so we wanted to also explore that capability here. We think that having instrumented measures is sort of the way to go as we move forward for this, so we can more quantitatively define the performance of people and track that over time. So even though the intervention wasn't targeted at standing balance, we wanted to see if there were also carryover effects for that. And then the strengthening was, again, we think this is an important metric in terms of overall health, and also allowing people to maintain a reserve in their activities of daily living. So that was the reason why I also wanted to look at strength as an outcome measure.
Okay. Two more questions and then we'll move on to Dr. Scrantz. Was gait speed an outcome measure?
In this particular study, no, but in the main study it was. And when Gabrielle is presenting, I will include the link for that article. Okay.
And two questions. People are very interested in accessing this on the move, the appendix that you showed that was the on the move manual.
Yes.
What is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, because it's out in the published literature and, under the abilities through copyright, that can be shared.
Okay.
So I'll share that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, Dr. Scrantz, you're up.
All right, thank you so much, Leslie. Thanks, Dr. Sparto. So like Leslie said earlier, I do have experience with community-based research, but my hat tonight is the clinical side. And so if I've done my job well, you will say that you could have done it just as well. So I wrote a case that I hope can reach you all from wherever you are treating across the country with geriatric folks. So I made a case that's available now in Jerry Notes about Ms. Ramsey. She's an 80-year-old woman coming into an outpatient physical therapy clinic with some of the signs that we see actually in the article from that Dr. Sparto just spoke about. So she has some similar examples of performance on her outcome measures. She has poor balance confidence, and in particular, this patient that I have written about has limited activity. So when I, as a clinician, think of task-specific exercise, clinically, I'm more thinking of what is the task that that patient is trying to do. that they're having difficulty with. So in the article, from the researcher side, we were thinking more of stepping and walking as the task, and that of course is the task that we are all doing all the time, but often for our patients, it's even more specific. So it's something like the task that they're having trouble with is just stepping over their tub side, it's stepping in their garden, it's stepping to get onto the bus. So thinking of taking that task specific goal and that primary outcome from this article and putting it into a patient. So wherever your patient is coming from, and again for Miss Ramsey, it is stepping in her yard, stepping to be able to fill her bird houses, stepping to be able to pick blueberries. So if we think of our patients, many of our geriatric patients have difficulty with stepping and walking, and it carries over into their daily lives and limits their participation. And we can then apply an intervention such as on the move. And even if we haven't looked specifically, because here as clinicians, we may just have time to read this article, the one that we've just talked about here. We may not have even specifically looked at all the on the move protocol. We may not be able to implement it in its entirety, but we can take away from this that patients who are older adults and who have poor balance confidence and who may have decreased strength and decreased balance can benefit from this type of a stepping intervention. And we know from this article on its own that the types of stepping that they benefit from in this article, these folks who were studied here, benefited from changes in velocity in their stepping, and they had variations in the distance that they were stepping, and we likely already do that. But this article gives us some evidence to support what we do already and can encourage us to go ahead and continue to do that and to know that we're using evidence-based practice whenever we've read this article and see that we can apply it with our patients. Another thing that this article shows us from the clinical standpoint is that PT works. So if we looked at the averages of folks who were in this article that Dr. Sparto discussed, we know that the balance outcome measures that we were seeing were in people who could maintain eyes closed, feet together stance for 30 seconds. We had people who could do a tandem stance hold for 30 seconds. And thinking of the patients that I have in my clinic, that's pretty darn good. So if I also think of the folks who I have who can't quite do that, then maybe I can even, by doing this type of intervention that's described here in this article, have even greater outcomes. So I'm excited to try it. I already do in some sense, and I'm excited to have the evidence to support what I'm doing in my clinical practice. It also shows us, and I think Dr. Sparto mentioned this earlier, that the folks in the wait list, so meaning that they got no intervention besides what they were already doing, which was probably not nothing since these folks were living in the community independently, with some support in their senior housing, but still independent community dwellers with some support for their community, being that it was senior based. So they probably weren't just sitting at home, and that's contrary to my physical therapy patients who often are just sitting at home. So thinking of what I'm doing, whether it's strength or this targeted stepping, or the task where I can progress from just a step to a step with a reach, to a step with a reach while looking at a target. I know that as a physical therapist that I'm going to make an improvement, and that this article, having read it now, I know that I am providing evidence-based therapy because this article supports physical therapy as a whole. So I do think we have the link to the case at the top of the chat section. It's just below the link to the article that we're talking about today. But again, I do hope that you all have your own patient that you can think of who might benefit from this type of treatment. And I am glad that Dr. Sparto is sharing the on the move information so that we can provide it more specifically. But I just want to give you all the empowerment to know that having read this article, you now have another tool in your toolbox as a physical therapist to be able to take with you to provide task-oriented therapy and evidence-based therapy. And that was the main focus of my case report, which you can read in Jerry Notes. And I'm going to turn it back over to Leslie with that.
Sorry, I'm just unmuting and coming back on screen here. Thank you very much, Dr. Scrontz. I enjoyed meeting Ms. Ramsey. I just typed in a question for you, which is, would you say that your patient also needed to be doing dual tasking in addition to the gait?
That is such a good question. And I was wondering as I was reading the article that we talked about with Dr. Sparto, so when we think of the laboratory-based settings where we're doing this type of measurement of AP and ML type sway in a participant, it's usually a quiet setting. And we didn't go into great detail about what the laboratory was like where these participants were. But if I'm going to have a patient who is already scared about working in her yard, then I know that I'm going to need to make things more challenging for her cognitively. I'm going to need to add some distractions in the clinic. So I think even taking this research article even farther to make it even more, again, task specific to what exactly my patient wants to be doing, I am going to need to add some dual tasking. So if I were to start with the stepping protocol described in On the Move, and make it challenging by changing this patient's stepping length, by changing this patient's time that she's standing in single limb stance, and by also changing whether she's doing forward stepping or lateral stepping. I'm going to need to go beyond that in order to make it more practically relevant for her life, for her to be able to do something like lift a bag of birdseed. And I think we do that as physical therapists when we're thinking of our patients. So I just encourage you to realize that you're using this research when you're doing that type of activity. And so when you bring in the stepping that was described in On the Move, to also go ahead and take it to the next level. So again, like you said, adding dual tasking, we can mimic that in the clinic. We're not going to have bees flying around in the clinic, hopefully. But we can ask the patient to imagine that, or to provide other types of targets for her to have to avoid while she's doing lifting and reaching and stepping at the same time. Great question.
Yeah. Do other people have questions? I'm just looking at our question bar here. I don't see other questions from people. We're at 8:53. So if I'm happy to read questions that other people post. Otherwise, I'll just keep asking questions. So Dr. Sparto and Dr. Scrontz, one of the things that I really, really liked about the On the Move program was that it wasn't just impairment oriented. And I see, so this is just a personal way that I visualize things, that these impairments are the systems that are impaired. These are the foundations to develop the skill. But the On the Move program is really focused on skill development.
Right.
And, a huge majority of falls occur while people are up and walking. Probably, I mean, I don't know the exact number, over 50%. Some people say 60, some people say 70. I mean, it's typically while people are up and moving. And it's that skill, right? That it's not just their strength that declines, it's that skill that declines. So I really liked it. Really liked that On the Move program, that it was really looking at balance and integrating balance with walking as a skill. One of the things that I liked then that Dr. Scrontz did in her case study was she understood that practicing that skill was the most risky and the most scary for the patient. And that's what she did while she was with the patient. And then she took those safe seated strengthening exercises and she had the patient do those at home. But I mean, the patient really probably wasn't scared to do exercises in sitting, right? And so I thought that was, Dr. Scrontz, I really liked how you said, yes, she needs both, but when she's with me, I'm gonna push her. I'm gonna do the challenging and risky things that she's afraid of, but I'm not gonna neglect the strength. I'm gonna make sure that that's in her home program. How do you see, so my question is really for both of you then, for the average practicing clinician out there, how do you see this balance between training skill and building strength and flexibility and cardiovascular endurance? And I'll open it up.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I agree. I think you need all of that. You know, you need to have the building blocks available to provide and give the reserve that then basically, allows a person to develop the skills. So it's all about sort of the affordances and the constraints. So, obviously if they don't have strength to get out of a chair or endurance to walk very far, then the skill, you're going to have a much more difficult time to develop that skill. So I think all of that is important. And I sort of take the same perspective also when I'm in the clinic, where, stuff that I know that needs guarding for the patient, I do in the clinic. In things that I know that the person can do safely at home in their environment, then I leave that stuff for home. So I share that perspective as well.
Absolutely. And this article in particular shows us there's benefit from both. It's really not that one is on its own better than the other, that we needed both. And we do know from other research that balance is so important, but it's also really scary. And I think introducing it in the clinic in a safe environment is very helpful for a lot of folks.
Okay, we do have some other questions come in, so I'm going to go ahead and take a look at a couple of those. We just have 3 minutes left. Let's see, and there was yet another question about the balance outcome measures, but I'm going to, I hope that person will pardon me. I'm going to move on to the intervention part. Did Ms. Ramsey improve on the balance confidence scale?
That almost sounds like a question that my PhD advisor asked. Is that from Vicki? So so that's a great question, because a lot of times what I found actually in my own PhD research was that when we were doing an exercise intervention and we weren't focusing on balance confidence, we didn't have improvements in the ABC. So again, this is this task-oriented part of the research. So what we plan to improve on and what we work on is typically what we see an improvement in. So unless, as a physical therapist, I was working on confidence as well, I don't know if I would see an improvement. That's a great question.
Mm-hmm. That is a great question, and I would say what you found is I found also in my research, and other people have also found that the fear of falling and balance confidence is its own bailiwick and needs special attention from us. Okay, I think this is to Dr. Sparto. Did you follow up with participants or have a thought on why the On the Move program was less adhered to than the standard exercise program? A real call for digging into the need for patient engagement for adherence and sustainability.
Right. I know in the article that they addressed that because in the main article, they saw that as well. And we reported on the rates of adherence in the article by Al-Qahtani. And I apologize, I don't recall the insights that they got of why there was less adherence to the On the Move program.
All right, and last question from Dr. Mercer. Hello, Dr. Mercer. So nice to have you on the webinar. She asks Dr. Sparto, how much do you think that the socialization aspect of the group formats may have influenced the results?
Hopefully you're asking about influence the results positively, because I do know from hearing presentations about this before that the participants just loved having the group exercise program. And one of the really interesting aspects that they found was the music that was being played. So, part of the reason for playing music was to facilitate sort of the timing exercises, but also they made sure to play music that was appropriate to their age group, and that was popular music, provoke good memories in the older adults. So, they came up with a playlist. They got suggestions from the residents on which music they should play, that they felt would be enjoyed by everyone. videos that Dr. Brock has, I mean, it looks like a party that's going on because everyone's having a really good time. So I think the really novel aspect of it. And the other thing I want to say before we jump off here is one of the participants who was involved in some of the research as a postdoctoral fellow mentioned that a recent article by their group came out where it looks like On the Move may reduce hospitalizations on down the line. So again, more work needs to be done, but there may be some other benefits in terms of downstream health concerns for the people who participate in the program.
All right. Well, on behalf of everyone on this Zoom webinar, I would like to thank Dr. Sparto and Dr. Scrontz for their work. My husband knows that I like good quotes, and he read a quote to me today, and he said, it's not just the discovery that's important, it's understanding the discovery. And I really love this format of having the researcher and the clinician together to talk about the discovery and about understanding what that discovery might mean for their patients. I'd like to thank everyone who attended. We had I would say this is the most people we have ever had attend a journal club, so hats off Dr. Sparto and Dr. Scrontz. And we look forward to seeing you all at the next journal club, which will be in July. And you will receive promotional information about which article that is and which case study that is very shortly, probably within the next 2 weeks. So thank you everyone very much.
All right, take care everyone.
Good night.
I enjoyed it.